Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. Today we're speaking with Wayne Potratz about his exhibition, Woods, Water, and Sky, on view now through August 2nd, 2025 in the Redepenning Gallery. Wayne, welcome.
Thank you.
We were just chatting, and I want to make sure that I got your name right. And you were saying that you go by Wayne in a different way.
Yeah, I have a handle, Iron Wayne, and I use W-A-I-N, which means wagon. So W-A-Y-N-E is just another name for a wagon. I have made wagons too as part of my work. So kind of making my own name in a way. So anyway,
Fantastic.
Yeah, Wayne.
Your work features a number of different materials, mediums, including some found objects, but primarily cast metals.
Right.
Iron, copper, bronze. I think cast bronze is maybe what people, the majority of the world, they think about metal sculpture, they think
Right.
cast bronze.
Right.
But cast iron is, I'll say niche, and I don't really mean it in that way, but it seems to be particularly of interest to people in Minnesota. Is that true or fair?
Well, it's pretty much nationally known. I don't know if that's the correct word. And there's some international practitioners. I was over at Wrocław, Poland for the Festival of High Temperatures, and they do an iron pour there. There's some other people in Poland. There are quite a few people in Germany. Mm-hmm. So it's in 1988, my colleague Tom Maakestad from Southern Illinois started a conference, the International Conference for Contemporary Cast Iron Art, and the last one was held in Berlin about 4 years ago. I don't know if there'll be another one. There's also a national conference. Mm-hmm. It's held at Sloss Furnaces National Historic Landmark in Birmingham, Alabama, and there is a Western conference of mainly people from Colorado West. Mm-hmm. They do a conference out west every other year. So
sure.
Sloss conference is every other year as well. So
is casting iron a favorite? I mean, it seems to be the majority of elements.
Well, it's more ritualistic. I mean, it's very difficult to do it by yourself. You could probably do a bronze casting by yourself with a small amount. Iron is a much higher temperature. Mm. You need a cupola. You can melt iron in a crucible furnace, but by the time you get the iron up to pouring temperature, the crucible's pretty soft and wobbly, so it's not a particularly safe thing to do. People do it, but
sure.
I don't recommend it. So the cupola or the cupolet, cupolet's a lidded cupola.
Okay.
Those are the ways that people cast iron. And it kind of started with an artist by the name of Julius Schmidt, who taught at Cranbrook and then taught at Iowa for a long time. And he was a tail gunner on a B-17 during World War II. Hmm. And he, like a lot of GIs, came into the universities and started art. And he thought, well, why should we follow the European tradition? So the European tradition was the artist makes this little model and sends it off to somebody who makes it, enlarges it, and then they send it to a foundry and they make the molds and they cast it and they do the finishing, and the artist comes and goes, oh, very nice, thank you very much. And Schmidt said, well, we can do all this ourselves. Yeah. Why don't we as artists control all of the process? And so he was one of the first people to make small cupolas. Mm-hmm. And so that, now it's, the other thing is iron's cheap. And it is readily available in the form of, for bigger cupolas, brake drums, for smaller cupolas, radiators. And I used to tell my students, don't tell your parents that you're paying a tuition to break up radiators, to melt and make art. But that's what we did. I was involved in 50 iron pours at the U of M over 50 years. 45 of them I directed myself, and then it was after I retired, I came back. Now they're not doing it anymore. So changing personnel, that happens. Yeah.
But an iron pour, a communal, and I think you said ritualistic kind of event.
Yeah, it involves essentially getting coke burning in a big refractory tube, and there, in the middle of the tube, there are places for the air to go in. You have a blower, and then there's a slag hole up top of the well. The cupola is 3 parts: the well, the wind box, and the stack. And at the bottom of the well is a hole called the tap hole. You plug that up, you get everything burning, and then it runs on just adding more coke and iron. So coke and iron, coke and iron, coke and iron. The iron falls down as the coke burns, and it gets into the melt zone, and it melts, and it drips into the well. And then every so often, you have a well full of iron that you have to deal with. And you know that by the fact that the slag starts coming out of the top. Slag floats on the top of the iron, and it runs out the slag hole. When you have iron in your slag hole, you have to tap out, because if it goes any higher, it gets in your tweers where the air's going in, then it's game over. Never had that happen. So,
Wow.
So it's ritualistic. It happens on a timely basis. It's communal. Can't do it by yourself.
Performative?
It is performative. I think of it as, I often thought of it as a kind of a dance, especially after people started bringing in video cameras, and they would run them fast,
Sure.
and you would see all this arrangement of bodies and the way in which people moved. And, once you get very familiar, you don't really need to talk to you. Everybody knows what to do. So
They find their
whatever they do. And that was always something with a class, was finding, what are people's skills? What are people comfortable with? Because you're handling material that's 2450, 2500 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's hot.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's 500 degrees over kind of the pouring temperature of bronze. So,
Wow.
yeah.
With a lot of artists, draftspersons, painters, they started quite young because all it takes is paper and a pencil, or paper and a math sheet, right?
Yeah.
What was your entree to metal pouring? And I don't imagine you were doing it as a youth. What was
I
your
made my
first
first metal casting in 1959. It was a lead casting. I made it in my basement. My father was a cabinet maker. He had a shop in the basement. I always had access to tools. I couldn't use the table saw. I used all the other tools. Lots of materials. My dad also, he was 4F during World War II, because he had one leg was slightly shorter, and he had something wrong with his punctured eardrum, I think. But he built gliders. So I had an endless supply of cedar strips that were 10, 12 feet long. I built all kinds of stuff out of that material, plus stuff he would bring in. But I was the kind of child that sat around in my room by myself making drawings.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of drawings. I had a really great elementary school teacher, Mrs. Bisbee. Thank you, Mrs. Bisbee. She introduced some very sophisticated problems to us, and we didn't really realize there were problems. But one of them that I remember distinctly was we divide the paper into four spaces. Then you had to make a design up on top. Then you had to modify that design with color and form on the way down. Make 3 more different kinds of iterations. And that was, when I think about it, it was really good training.
Foundational.
For thinking about, what do you do? How do you riff off of any kind of form or any kind of activity that you're doing? So anyway, thank you, Miss Bisbee. Yeah.
Were you, when you were making things out of the cedar strips and when you were casting lead, were you making specifically at the time what you thought of as art objects, or were they other?
My first thing was a little lead head.
Yeah.
You know, I'd heard of lost wax casting, so I made a little thing out of wax, and then I didn't have mold material. I just made plaster. But you can pour lead into plaster, that's no, as long as it's dry.
Okay.
So I put it in our wood stove in the basement, and burned it out, melted the lead with a torch, and poured this little thing. I don't know what happened to it. I probably melted it back down, but anyway, that was my first casting. Then when I got to then I took 4 years of art in high school, and I got to Macalester College. I was enrolled in art and education. I was going to be an art teacher. So I can't remember how that, I think I know that came out. I had to write an essay in 9th grade. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I didn't know what to say. My mom said, well, you like art. And your uncle, I had a distant uncle, short-tail relation, he's an art teacher. Why don't you write about that? So I did that. So then that was like kind of in the back of my mind.
Wow.
So I did art and education. And then I went to grad school at Berkeley.
Wow.
Came back here, and I had student taught at Mounds View High School. So there was a job there, which I got. I taught high school for a couple of years, and then the Minnesota Community College system started. I taught out at the then Lakewood Community College
Sure.
for just 1 year. And then the guy who was teaching at the University of Minnesota took a job in California. And these were the days before equal opportunity, and chairmen would just say, yeah, I need a drawer. You got anybody down there? And, so one of my good friends was hired from Oklahoma over the phone. So I heard about this job. I went and had an interview, and that was it. He said, okay. And that was in 1969, and I got paroled 45 years later.
Speaking of your incredible career in education, I shared with you, I learned casting from one of your former students. Do you know, are there a lot of your students that then went into teaching?
Yeah, some.
Yeah.
So especially grad students that gravitated towards the foundry. I mean, the foundry is, it's dirty, it's hot, it's smelly, it's messy. A lot of people don't like that. Plus, there's an element of danger, which is actually one of the exciting things, right?
Sure.
You've got tapping out a furnace and you're running 300 pounds of iron into a big ladle. That's pretty exciting. And learning how to handle that material and be safe. That's people like it. There's something about, the fire arts involve a lot of chance, and chance is, as somebody said, a law of the universe whose law we cannot discover. So chance is interesting as an artist. Sometimes things happen and you don't especially like what happened, and sometimes, wow, that's really a revelation. Maybe I should try making that mistake again.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, the spectrum of approaches in art is as broad and wide and deep as anything in the world.
Yeah.
But a lot of artists have a planned outcome that they chase the whole time and do a lot of preparatory drawing and studies in hues before applying it to the painting. Your process, what does that look like?
I very rarely make a drawing of something I want to make.
Yeah.
I've thought about my studio as a kind of big three-dimensional computer, and it goes along with, I used to tell this to my students, I call it the pack rat theory of sculpture. So a sculptor's like a pack rat who goes out of his den and drags all kinds of materials around, and then moves those piles around until one of them says, "Hey, pick me, I'm art. Pick me, I'm art." And you go, "Oh, okay. I think that's a pretty nice arrangement." So, so right now, you know, at my age, I'm not making anything big anymore, and I'm really going through all of the. I have artist disease, which is collection.
Yeah.
You know, I gave 2 years ago. I gave a 1,000-piece collection of turtle images to the Minnesota Herpetological Society.
Wow.
And last year, I had an intern from the U, and we measured, photographed, and documented all my other collections and all the work that I had in my studio. So one of the things I've been doing is taking apart old work and rethinking about it, redoing it, taking parts. And for example, this piece was, the round form was like that and was on another object.
Sure.
So there were these dome-like pieces. So I took that piece apart and I turned it around. Oh, okay, bowls. And then you know, it's naturally it's kind of like a lake or kind of like a body of water. So, and of course, I like to canoe and fish. So, so those themes kind of pop on through.
You mentioned the turtle, which is a persistent and recurring motif throughout your works.
Yeah.
It's rich in metaphor, kind of universally.
Yeah.
It's an important aspect of many cosmologies and mythologies around the world.
Yep.
Is it for you primarily a personal symbol, or are you riffing concurrently with the universal aspect of it as well as your personal relationship? Tell us about the turtle.
Okay, so like many people who grew up in the 40s and 50s, I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout.
Yeah.
And I was a member of a group of white kids who did Native American dances called the Minnesota Calumet Dancers in the 50s and 60s. Danced all over the United States. Used to dance out at the state fair. So I spent my youth kind of studying in a way and doing, you know, beadwork and sewing moccasins and doing Native American craft stuff. And so when I got to graduate school, I was in my very first class, and Harold Paris was the instructor. He had been an army artist in World War II, had drawn at the Nuremberg trials. He was teaching sculpture, and he said, "Okay, anybody here know how to cast any metal?" So I raised my hand because I had worked out at a little foundry in undergraduate school called the Mendota Sculpture Foundry. Just a two-man operation. Richard Randall and George Wright. Richard Randall went on to teach at Stanford. So I raised my hand and he said, "Okay, you're the teaching assistant." I went, "Oh, okay." That was a quick appointment. And so we were doing standard investment molds, which is you make a wax and then you mix up an investment material of silica flour, grog, sand, plaster, and you put it in water and you pour that around the wax, and then you put that mold in a kiln and you heat the mold up, and the wax burns out, and then the carbon burns out, and the plaster sets this refractory material. Well, they all look alike. All of these molds were all round. They were all kind of about this big. And so I started marking my molds so I knew which molds were mine, and I started marking it with this symbol that I remembered from my Indian dancing days, which was a diamond with 4 kind of E's coming off of it. It's a Native American, it's actually a Dakota symbol for the turtle, and the turtle's a feminine symbol, and Native women often wore it right here as a way to increase fertility. So it's a fertility symbol, and of course we live on Turtle Island here, according to Native American legend, and you know, as you mentioned, lots of mythologies about the turtle. So I started marking that on my mold, and it's like anything. Once something gets into your consciousness, where does it go from there? So, okay, what's that about? And so then after graduate school, I thought, I'm going to make a few. So I started making them. So the turtle lurks in the back of my mind. It lurks in some of the images, and it's become like a totem. So I use it as my signature, artistic signature, and of course people right now are very sensitive about cultural borrowing, but my retort is, cultural borrowing has been going on for millennia. And so I don't feel any shame or regret from my studying of Native American culture and my borrowing, if you will, from that culture. I have great respect for Native people, and especially for their belief and maybe their understanding that there's a spirit in everything. And I mean, right now we are on the forefront of physics and science. We are finding that maybe really be the case, that there is a consciousness in rocks. There's a consciousness. There's certainly a consciousness in trees and mushrooms who communicate with one another, we've discovered. So, that's one of the reasons for my admiration for Native American culture.
Sure. You also mentioned a love through the origins of your camping experiences with the Boy Scouts, with canoeing and camping, and there's a lot of that imagery as well. Not just the imagery, but I imagine also objects maybe collected while on trips.
Yeah, a lot of these rocks are.
How do you tell us about that process? How do you identify something as being, because
It's like it speaks to you in some
Yeah.
way, either visually or something. It comes into your consciousness. That piece of wood there is that's from Alton Lake, and that is a piece of pine and burl that was struck off of a tree by a lightning bolt. And I have a friend who is very deep into Asian philosophy. And he said, "You have wood that's been touched by fire, been hit by lightning, by electricity. Can I have some?" So I gave him part of this, before I started. It took me a long time. It's maybe 20 years ago I found that piece. It took me a long time to figure out what to do with it. So things lurk around until some idea hits. So I think of the studio as like a three-dimensional computer where I shift things around.
And find relations.
And find relationships, right. I think relationship is what creates meaning.
The work resonates with me for that aspect. I mean, there are canoes in it and objects clearly of wild spaces. And it fires off parts of my brain that I like to think are adult, but also adult, but also the child within. The walking sticks and the spear form. I mean, they remind me of scepters. As a kid, imagining wild wizard warriors of the backwoods or the backyard. I mean, they would hold things like that. Do you find some of your imagery emerges from long ago, or is this all like?
Well, I'm interested in play.
Yeah.
Play is when there is more than an infinite number of possibilities. There is actually a number called the Aleph, which is a mathematical number. And I'll forget the name of the mathematician who proved this, but he proved that there is a number beyond the infinite mathematically. So play is really important because if you remember when you were a child, the broomstick could be a rocket ship, it could be a weapon, it could be a horse, it could be any number of things. And so really to continue on in art, you have to kind of get back to where you were before you went to school and got educated out of creativity. School is one of the great killers of creativity because for the most part, there's always one right answer. And in art, there's not necessarily a right answer. There can be many answers. Or there can be no answer. I can't figure this out. So set it aside. So,
Did that drive your philosophy as a professor?
Oh yeah, I used to
knowing
teach
that
about playing.
You were
Yeah.
trying not to stifle
Yeah,
creativity.
I would say, look, so here's your assignment. Here's some wax. Don't try to make anything. Just play with it. Just see what the material does. How does it manipulate in your hand? Here's some ways you can work with it. I do little demos. Here's some ways you can do various things with it. Now go out and play with it. Come back and show me something that you've made through your play. So that was kind of big in whatever sculpture. I also taught basic sculpture with clay and plaster and brazing and welding and all that stuff. Yeah.
Was that was that at your philosophical core from the start, or was that something that you stumbled into, or like a lightning strike kind of realization?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's something that comes to you when you're thinking about, what is it you're doing with students?
Sure.
I always thought of the foundry as, first of all, I always made my own work in the foundry.
Yeah. To model that behavior intentionally? Or
Yeah,
was it
so
more pragmatic?
I was always working on something that was important to me. So when I was casting my work with the class, I was paying attention because there was something I wanted right there. And also they watched me have spectacular failures.
Yeah.
Or molds broke open and I did something wrong. I remember when I had a commission to do a series of reliefs in Dubai. And so I was pouring all these. It was a swarm of turtles that was on the way to some sea thing that is in. I can't remember the name of the resort. It's in Dubai, but anyway, I didn't go there. So I'm pouring these molds, and every other one is, what's going on? It's only taking a little bit of metal. I had failed to cut the gate between the cup and the piece on every other piece. Boom. Very stupid. But easy to do. You're in a hurry. You're making a lot of work. It was like hundreds of pieces. Working alongside of the students in the space was an important lesson.
I think most, if not all artists spend their lives chasing a personal, unique visual vocabulary. You clearly have that. Have you always had that unique visual vocabulary?
No, it's something when I went as an undergraduate, I was a Renaissance artist. I made drawings, paintings, printmaking. Taught myself ceramics. We didn't have any ceramics at Macalester at that point. So I did a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you kind of settle in. So when I got the job at the university, I got the job because I was a metal caster and I could do that. I had built my own foundry when I was teaching in high school in my garage.
Wow.
In St. Paul. I lived over by the old Monroe High School down below the Jefferson Hill near West 7th Street. And I rented a house and it was a big double garage there. And the guy had been an automobile mechanic. And so there was a pit there for working on a car. And that was great because I built my kiln over the pit. I built a furnace and I was casting metal in this thing. So I was hired to do that job. Now I'm forgetting the question.
It was
squirrels
about,
in the attic.
It's all good.
squirrels in the attic, you know.
And every path we take has
Yeah.
been fruitful and interesting. But it's primarily about your unique visual vocabulary. And you were expressing how it came to you over time.
Yeah.
Do you recall the moment when you were like, I'm onto something. This looks like nothing anyone else has done.
I don't know if I ever quite put it
Really?
to myself like that. I think that when I'm onto something, I start laughing I start laughing.
Yeah?
Yeah. If something's really going well, I start chuckling. Okay, this is going where I want it to go, or oh wow.
It fires
So a lot
off
of a lot of
endorphins,
these
yeah.
things are just by the fact that I'm in the studio and I grab this and I might walk over here and set it over there, and then all of a sudden, oh, so there's a relationship that I think I might want to think about. So these are all, for example, this piece was just by itself, and then as I was thinking about this show, I saw it as a landscape on which I could set other objects. Same with that piece back there, that big piece of copper. That's from a project where a guy came in and he said, "Hey, look, I'm a nautical archaeologist, and he was familiar with the Ulubran shipwreck, which is a shipwreck off the coast of Turkey. You can go to Bodrum, Turkey, to the museum there, which is ironically run by Texas A&M University, the #1 school for nautical underwater archaeology is Texas A&M, believe it or not. Huh. Anyway, they found these ingots. They're called oxide ingots, and they look like kind of a hide, and it's because you could grab them on each end, okay, carry them, and also the way they fit in the ships, the two ends made it very stable. Mm-hmm. Well, there was a ship that went down there, and during ancient times, yeah. And it was discovered, and so this guy said, "Look, I want to see. There's no record of how these were made. So can you and your students figure out how these were made?" So I had it's called an undergraduate research opportunity project. So about 4 or 5 students we were thinking about. So we tried different kind of mold material. And then I had a student, he was really an interesting guy. He had been in the Air Force. I had a lot of students that were like in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they were some of the most interesting students because they really wanted to be there. They weren't just fulfilling a degree requirement. Anyway, he said, "Hey, I've been doing some reading, and I think that a lot of these maybe ancient metal casters, they were itinerant because they had to move around to find sources of ore and wood for charcoal and stuff like that." And he said, leads me to think about, well, where would they get their mold materials? Well, how about the banks of rivers? So we went, oh, okay, let's do that. So we went down the Mississippi River. We dug up the bank. Turned out to be just the right amount of sand and clay. Naturally, we made a mold, and the castings came out just like the ones you see in the museum. He was very happy, and we were very happy. And students all wrote up their reports, and everybody had a good time. But that was sitting around in the studio, and I wanted to use it. Mm-hmm. I wanted to think about using it. So it yet again became like this one. Just this is a leftover from another commission. So when you if you have a commission, you want to make extras because not everything comes out the way you want it to come out. Sure. When you're casting metal. It's chancy. So it's the same thing. This was a wall piece, and then it was sitting around, and I laid it flat, and I went, oh yeah, and it's got the little pins underneath for fitting it into the wall. Yeah. See? But when it was standing up, it's kind of floating. I kind of like that. Kind of like the way that looked.
Sure.
So then we'd start playing around with that.
Both the two pieces that we've just been talking about have distinctive and different patinas. Surface treatments after the casting. How do you decide on what's going to get that kind of surface treatment? And then I know that one is quite unique.
Yeah, it's called the retirement patina. So when I was teaching, I would always teach how to make patinas by mixing up various solutions, and there are many books written about patinas, hundreds of books. So they're all chemical solutions. And I would talk about, well, here's how to get one relatively quickly. You heat the metal up to about 200 degrees, and you spray the solution on till you get the color you want. So a little bit of heat, spray, and you can get a color very, very quickly. Now that I'm retired, I don't have to do that. So that one took probably about a couple of months.
Wow.
I'd come in every day and put a little material on and just let those are all copper salts, copper nitrate, copper sulfate, copper carbonate, maybe one other one. Just let it sit on there until it got. And what happened when you do that, it sometimes gets a very kind of crystalline, kind of interesting surface on the top. And then, like this one's got paint. I'm not opposed to painting on my bronze. Picasso used to paint his bronze. Some casters say, "Ooh, that's a sacrilege."
Jasper Johns, too,
yeah, a lot of artists have painted on bronze. It's just it's another way to think about it. So there are various, there's silver nitrate over there is a patina. There's ferric nitrate. They're just some standard ones that produce different colors. And iron, iron's more difficult to patina because it's so active. Loves oxygen. So, iron, you're kind of limited to black, brown, kind of yellows, oranges.
It sounds alchemical.
It's kind
magic.
Of, when I did my patinas with the spray bottles, I used to describe it as the mad scientist approach to patinas. Because if you read the patina books, it'll say like, okay, you mix a solution of copper sulfate and copper nitrate, spray this on, or apply this, or soak it in there for. But I would take all kinds of different things and put one on top of the other just to see what kind of reaction I would get. Things you're not supposed to do. Yeah. So again, playing around,
sure,
violating your own expectations, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Let's open it up to questions.
I think of casting often as a series, as a way to make a series of pieces, kind of like a print.
Yeah.
And I don't, at least from your work here, I don't see much evidence of that. Has that been a thing for you in the past, or have you avoided it?
Well, this is a pattern. I have a number of these. This is a pattern that I made. So some of them are patterns, but a lot of them, and look, this was a pattern. This was originally a pattern, just wood, and then I carved the rest. Mm-hmm. The paddle pieces are a wooden. They're a two-piece number one pine pattern that comes apart, so I can mold one half, flip the mold over, set the other half the paddle on, mold the other half to get the paddle that's three-dimensional on both sides. So I do work with patterns. There was a pattern for those glass pieces. So the glass pieces over there. So I had this commission to restore a 19th century Norwegian American lamp for the museum down in Decorah, Iowa, the Norwegian American Museum. And it's in a little church outside of town. And they had just part of it. They had one globe that had been saved. They had one or two baskets. So the globes fit in the basket, and there were one arm like this and then two arms like that. So it was 4 kerosene lamps, essentially. So I did the ironwork, but then I had the task of, I have to make a mold that you can blow glass into. So I made a very careful plaster mold, 3-part plaster mold of this glass object. And then I made a mold of the mold, cast that in iron, put that together. So essentially there are 2 parts that open up like this, and the glass blower gathers glass on the blowpipe, puts it into the bottom part of the mold, closes the 2 parts, and then blows till it pushes up against. So those are all the rejects. Those are all the ones from the glass blowers. It wasn't quite sharp enough, or didn't look as good as the other ones. So I had those around so I did that in the 70s. So they've been sitting around for 40, 45 years, and I finally figured out what to do with them.
They turned out better. They were too good for the commission.
Well, I don't know about that. They're just very different. They're just strange things, strange things.
What is Woots?
What is Woots? Okay. So here's a piece of Woots. So I teach smelting up at North House Folk School. I've spent a lot of time in Japan, and have several Japanese friends. And the very first conference, we had a delegation from Japan that came. I still remember this. Is Kinosuke Totsu. He was head of the traditional casting department at Tokyo Gaidai, Tokyo Fine Arts University, the #1 school in Japan. And we met, and he hands me an envelope. Inside was 7 $100 uncirculated bills as a gift to the conference. So he did some demonstrations. So from that relationship, I met other artists in Japan. I've been there, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. One of my friends said, hey, we want to come to the 3rd or 4th Iron Conference. I can't remember. It was in New Jersey at Grounds for Sculpture. That was where the conference was. And we'd like to do a tatara. I said, well, what's that? Oh, we want to smelt some iron in the Japanese manner. We can do it in a brick one. Be easy to do. Okay. So I went to Japan, and I met with them, and I participated in one at the Tokyo Institute of Technology in the street. And then I went and I met, through a former student of mine, the man who makes all of the tamahagane, the high carbon steel used for Japanese swords, knives, tool makers, and so on. His name was Akira Kihara. He just passed away last year at the age of almost 90. And I met him. He invited me. I went, and we did a little small one called a Kodai tatara. Well, when you make a tatara, you're causing all the iron to grab carbon from the charcoal, and it all comes down and it forms a bloom in the bottom of your furnace. Think of a chimney that's just full of charcoal, and you put charcoal and then iron ore, charcoal and iron ore. You do that for 12, 14 hours. And what forms is a bloom. This is like part of a bloom. But you also get all kinds of little pieces that don't necessarily all get aggregated into this bloom. So we rake through all the charcoal after it's cooled. We grab all those pieces. Then you put them in a crucible, okay? And you put a little charcoal on top, put a refractory cap on top, put it in a furnace, and just cook the living daylights out of it for 4 or 5 hours. So it's called woots. Woots is it's a derivation of a Hindi word because the Indians made crucible steel, and that crucible steel was traded all the way to Damascus. And when the Damascus sword makers started hammering this out, they noticed that naturally occurring in this material were these patterns, and that's where the term Damascus steel comes from. Now, smiths just put all kinds of different steels together and they make these incredible patterns. So when Mr. Chiara came for a workshop, he came in, I don't remember now, maybe 2004, something like that. He did 2 weeks of workshops. We made 2 Kodai Tataras. But there was a smith who came to learn about this, and he was a guy who made knives with Bible verses in them by Damascus. That's how integrated it can get, right? Thinking about how do you put steel together so that when you forge it all out, it has John 3:16 or something, something in it, something very. So this is a little tiny piece of woots. It's just a little crucible. There's a little bit, and this one didn't get cooked quite long enough, but then it had this really interesting texture on the top. So if you do it really a long time, it'll get very smooth and be just like a big round kind of cake. They call them woots cakes. So this one just happened to, see, this is one of these great serendipities. This one just happened to fit in this piece that I had made earlier.
It wasn't designed.
No, it was not a design, see? Didn't make any drawings for that.
The computer paid off.
Yeah, and so those vessels, some of these vessels are made with a Japanese method called sogata, where you make a sweep and you turn the sweep in a clay mold. That's how traditional teapots are made. That's how temple bells are made, with big sweeps. So that's one of the first things I studied when I started going to Japan. So I've been back numerous times, and I'm interested in Asian culture.
Sure.
Been to China a couple times, Korea several times. Japan is the most I've been in Asia.
In closing, Wayne, do you feel like the artist has a specific purpose in society today?
In our society?
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's a big contrast in cultures, by the way in which they think about artists. I'll just tell you a little story. I did a lecture at Tokyo Gaidai, and afterwards, students had a party, and in the faculty offices, that's in my drinking days, lots of sake was being drank, and I was sitting there, and a group of students came up and they said, "May we ask you a question?" And I was just, wow, may we ask you a question? Well, of course, that's why I'm here. Contrast that to American students who are like, "Hey, Wayne, I got something for you," you know. So anyway, so different cultures have different ways in which they think about artists and the place of artists in society. I think I'm for all kinds of art. I'm for the proverbial little old lady who paints on Sunday. I'm for amateur artists. I'm for professional artists. I'm for art centers, art classes, because words and numbers aren't the only way of saying. So I think artists demonstrate that they demonstrate the importance of the visual, that there's visual information that we take in. And I mean, through the centuries, artists have played different roles. They've often been in the employ of the powers that be, right? Especially to illustrate or inform or to teach in a way.
Propagandize.
Propagandize, exactly, and that's still an issue, I guess. Yeah, art to me is obviously very important because I built a whole life around it, and I think if you're an artist, you don't retire from art. You just get to a point where you can't make it anymore. I'm getting to that point where it's getting, I don't pick up 150 pounds anymore. So let's put it that way. Yeah.
Wayne, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
For sharing
Yeah.
your work with our
Yeah,
community.
thanks. Nice to see you all again. Yeah.